Captain Velthar straightened his 6 limbs and adjusted his ceremonial robes as he watched the human transport ship dock with the massive space station. The annual Interspecies Summit was always a grand affair, bringing together representatives from hundreds of worlds across the galaxy. As the senior diplomatic officer for the Galactic Council, Velthar had dealt with every type of alien species imaginable. He prided himself on being able to read anyone within minutes of meeting them. The Velthari were known throughout the galaxy for their incredible intelligence. Their brains could process information at speeds that made even advanced computers seem slow. Velthar's people had been running galactic politics for over 3,000 years, and they were very good at it. So when he heard that humans were sending a delegation to this year's summit, he wasn't particularly concerned. Humans were relatively new to galactic society, having only made contact about 130 years ago. They were from some backwater planet called Earth, and from what Velthar had read in the files, they seemed harmless enough. The human delegation stepped off their ship, and Velthar had to suppress a laugh. They looked so ordinary compared to the other species at the summit. No extra arms, no telepathic abilities, no natural armor or weapons. They were just boring. The leader of their group was a man named Minho, who had been introduced as their ambassador. He had a wide, friendly smile that seemed permanently stuck on his face, and he kept bowing slightly to everyone he met, which Velthar found amusing. As the humans made their way through the station's corridors, Minho stopped every few meters to apologize for something. He apologized when one of his team members accidentally bumped into a wall. He apologized when their luggage cart made too much noise on the metal flooring. He even apologized for the weather on their home planet, which made absolutely no sense, since they were in space. The other alien delegates began whispering among themselves, clearly unimpressed by what they were seeing. The Korthak representative, a massive creature covered in spikes and armor plating, leaned over to whisper in Velthar's ear. "These humans are pathetic," he growled in his deep voice. "Look at how weak they are. They apologize for everything. They're probably here to beg for protection or trade deals." Velthar nodded in agreement. The Korthak were warriors by nature, so they had little patience for what they saw as weakness. Things got even more embarrassing for the humans when they reached the main conference hall. Ambassador Minho had brought what he called homemade snacks to share with the other delegates. He pulled out containers filled with small, sweet-smelling treats and began offering them around the room. Most of the alien species looked at the food with suspicion or disgust. The Zephyrians, who absorbed energy directly from their home star, couldn't even process solid food. The crystalline beings from Zerion 7 found the whole concept of eating organic matter revolting. "This is clearly some primitive bonding ritual," whispered the Altarian delegate to her companion. "They're trying to make friends through food. Sharing. How childish." Several other species began laughing quietly among themselves. It was obvious to everyone that the humans were completely out of their depth. They were like children trying to sit at the adults' table, bringing toys and snacks to a serious political gathering. But there was one human who caught Velthar's attention, though not for the reasons he expected. While Ambassador Minho was busy making friends and distributing snacks, another member of the human delegation sat quietly in the corner. His name was Tai Hyung, and he had been introduced simply as a technical advisor. He had a small tablet device in his hands and seemed to be constantly working on it, his fingers moving across the screen with incredible speed. At first, Velthar thought Tai Hyung was probably just taking notes or playing some simple game to pass the time. But as the hours went by, something about the man's behavior began to bother him. Tai Hyung's eyes were constantly moving, watching every delegate, every conversation, every interaction in the room. His fingers never stopped moving on that tablet, but he wasn't just randomly tapping. There was a pattern to it, a rhythm that suggested he was processing enormous amounts of information. The mysterious moment came during a break in the formal proceedings. Ambassador Minho was chatting casually with a group of delegates from various species, his ever-present smile making him seem completely relaxed and carefree. The conversation had turned to military matters, specifically the various defense systems that different worlds used to protect themselves from pirates and raiders. "Oh, we've been having a few small problems with our planetary defense grid lately," Minho said with a laugh, as if he was talking about a broken kitchen appliance. Nothing too serious, just some technical difficulties. Our engineers have been tinkering with some of the older satellites, trying to get them working properly again." He shrugged as if the whole thing was barely worth mentioning. The other delegates exchanged meaningful glances. This was exactly the kind of information they had been hoping to hear. If Earth's defenses were down or malfunctioning, it presented an opportunity that various species had been waiting for. Humans controlled several valuable mining colonies and trade routes that other civilizations had been eyeing for decades. The Vorthak Empire's representative, General Krexmar, made a mental note to report this information back to his superiors immediately. The Draknari Confederation had been looking for an excuse to expand their territory in that sector of space. Even the peaceful Altarians began calculating how they might benefit from humanity's apparent weakness. But while all this political maneuvering was happening around him, Taehyung never looked up from his tablet. His fingers continued their constant dance across the screen, and for just a moment, Velthar caught sight of his face. The human's expression was completely calm, almost serene, but his eyes were sharp and calculating. There was something about that look that made Velthar's skin crawl, though he couldn't quite put his finger on why. The most unsettling thing was Taehyung's smile. Unlike Ambassador Minho's warm, genuine expressions, Taehyung's smile seemed cold and distant. It was the kind of smile that never quite reached the eyes, the kind that suggested the person wearing it knew something that everyone else didn't. As the day wore on, and more species began to see the humans as easy targets, that smile never wavered, and Taehyung's fingers never stopped moving. The third day of the summit started like any other, with delegates from various species discussing trade agreements and territorial boundaries. The morning sessions had been relatively peaceful, with most conversations focusing on mining rights and shipping routes through different sectors of the galaxy. Everyone seemed to be in a good mood, and even the usually aggressive species were being surprisingly diplomatic. But everything changed when the afternoon session began, and the topic shifted to the Kepler 442 system. This was a star system that had been colonized by humans about 50 years ago, and it had become quite valuable due to its rich mineral deposits and strategic location along major trade routes. Several human families had made their homes there, building communities and raising children on the various planets and space stations throughout the system. General Krexmar of the Vorthak Empire stood up to address the assembly, his massive form casting a shadow across the room. The Vorthak were a militaristic species, known for their aggressive expansion policies and their belief that might made right. They had been quietly building up their forces in that sector of space for months, and now they were ready to make their move. "The Kepler 442 system has been claimed by the Vorthak Empire," Krexmar announced in his booming voice, his chest swelling with pride. "We have superior military forces in the area, and we are invoking our right of conquest. The human settlements there will be relocated to make room for proper Vorthak colonies." He looked directly at the human delegation as he spoke, clearly expecting them to either surrender immediately or begin begging for some kind of compromise. The other delegates in the room began murmuring among themselves. This kind of aggressive, territorial expansion wasn't uncommon in galactic politics, especially when it involved weaker species. Most of them expected the humans to either accept the situation or try to negotiate some kind of deal where they could keep a small portion of their colonies in exchange for giving up the rest. Ambassador Minho's perpetual smile flickered for just a moment, but he quickly recovered and maintained his diplomatic composure. However, it was another member of the human delegation who responded to the Vorthak general's declaration. Her name was Yunji, and she had been quietly observing the proceedings from her seat near the back of the human group. Yunji was different from the other human diplomats. While Minho and the others had maintained their friendly, almost naive demeanor throughout the summit, there was something more serious about her. She had been taking careful notes throughout all the sessions, and whenever other species made comments about human weakness or inferiority, she had simply smiled and said nothing. But now, as she slowly rose from her chair, that smile was nowhere to be seen. "I want to make sure I understand this correctly," Yunji said, her voice carrying clearly across the large conference room. Her tone was calm and measured, but there was an edge to it that made several delegates stop their conversations and pay attention. "You're saying that the Vorthak Empire is going to take our colonies by force. You're going to remove our people from their homes, from the worlds where they've lived and worked for decades." General Krexmar nodded confidently, apparently pleased that the human was finally grasping the situation. "That is correct. Your species lacks the military strength to defend those territories. It is simply the natural order of things. The strong take from the weak." Yunji's expression grew darker as she continued speaking. "Captain Wu Jin was born on Kepler 442b. He's lived there his entire life, 43 years. He met his wife there, built a home there, started a family there. His 3 children have never known any other world." Her voice was getting quieter, but somehow it seemed to fill the room more completely. "His oldest daughter just started school. His youngest son took his first steps in the garden that Wu Jin planted with his own hands." The general shifted uncomfortably, not quite sure where this conversation was heading. Other delegates were also beginning to look nervous, though they couldn't quite explain why. There was something about the way Yunji was speaking that made the air in the room feel heavy and tense. "What you're telling me," Yunji continued, "is that you plan to destroy all of that. You want to rip apart families, destroy communities, and scatter our people across the galaxy simply because you have bigger guns and more ships." She paused for a long moment, her eyes never leaving the Vorthak general's face. "Is that an accurate summary of your position?" General Krexmar puffed out his chest even further, his armor plates rattling as he moved. He was used to intimidating other species with his size and aggressive posture, and he wasn't about to back down from what appeared to be an emotional human female. "Your sentiment makes you weak, human. Attachment to places and people is a liability in the real world. The galaxy belongs to those strong enough to take it and hold it." That's when Taehyung finally looked up from his tablet for the first time in hours. Throughout the entire summit, he had been quietly working in the corner, seemingly oblivious to the political discussions happening around him, but now his fingers had stopped moving across the screen, and his attention was completely focused on the Vorthak general. "General," Taehyung said in a conversational tone that was almost friendly, "I have a question for you." His voice was so calm and casual that it seemed completely out of place in the increasingly tense atmosphere of the room. "Do you know what we call species that threaten human children?" The question seemed to catch everyone off guard. Several delegates looked confused, unsure of where this line of conversation was heading. General Krexmar frowned, apparently annoyed by what seemed like a random question from someone he had barely noticed before. "What are you talking about, human?" the general growled. Taehyung's smile never wavered as he delivered his answer. "Target practice." The response was immediate and varied. Some delegates began laughing nervously, thinking the human was making some kind of joke. After all, everyone knew that humans had no significant military presence in the galaxy. They had a few small defense fleets protecting their core worlds, but nothing that could challenge a major military power like the Vorthak Empire. The idea of humans threatening anyone was almost absurd, but not everyone was laughing. Ambassador Yunji's expression hadn't changed at all, and her eyes remained fixed on General Krexmar with an intensity that made several nearby delegates shift uncomfortably in their seats. There was something in her gaze that suggested Taehyung's comment hadn't been a joke at all, but rather a simple statement of fact. The most unsettling thing was how calm both humans remained. In most diplomatic situations, when tensions rose, to this level, all parties involved would become visibly agitated. There would be raised voices, aggressive gestures, and clear signs of emotional distress. But Yunji and Taehyung seemed completely relaxed, as if they were discussing the weather, rather than potential military conflict. General Krexmar tried to regain control of the situation by returning to his aggressive posturing. "You humans are even more foolish than I thought if you believe empty threats will change anything. The Vorthak Empire has conquered dozens of worlds. We have battle fleets that could reduce your precious colonies to asteroid fields." But his words seemed to have less impact than before. Something had changed in the room's atmosphere, and even the most confident delegates were beginning to feel uneasy. They couldn't quite put their finger on what was different, but there was a sense that they were missing something important, something that the humans understood but weren't sharing. Yunji finally sat back down, but her eyes never left the Vorthak general's face. The smile that had been absent during her speech slowly returned, but it was nothing like the warm diplomatic expressions the humans had been showing throughout the summit. This smile was cold and calculating, and it made even seasoned diplomats feel like prey being watched by a predator. The tension in the conference room was thick enough to cut with a knife when suddenly every communication device in the chamber began beeping simultaneously. Delegates from across the galaxy looked around in confusion as their personal tablets, communication implants, and even the room's main display screens all activated at once. This had never happened before in the history of the interspecies summit. A voice filled the room, but it wasn't coming from any of the delegates. It was Mother Prime, the most advanced artificial intelligence in the galaxy. Mother Prime was responsible for monitoring all interstellar communications, tracking potential threats, and maintaining the vast network of information that kept galactic civilization running smoothly. The AI rarely spoke directly to political gatherings, preferring to work behind the scenes and provide reports through official channels. Honored delegates, Mother Prime's voice resonated through the chamber with an electronic quality that somehow managed to convey urgency. I am requesting an immediate emergency session. My processors have been running continuous analysis for the past 6 hours, and I have discovered information that requires immediate attention. Captain Velthar looked around nervously. In all his years of diplomatic service, he had never seen Mother Prime interrupt a formal session like this. The AI was programmed to respect political protocols and would normally wait for an appropriate break in proceedings before sharing any information, no matter how important it might be. "What kind of information?" asked the Altarian representative, her crystalline voice echoing strangely in the suddenly quiet room. "I must report a critical oversight in our intelligence gathering systems," Mother Prime replied. "For the past 127 standard years, since humans first made contact with galactic civilization, we have been carefully cataloging their activities throughout known space. We have detailed records of their diplomatic missions, trade agreements, cultural exchanges, and colonization efforts. Our databases contain information about every official human vessel, every registered settlement, and every documented interaction between humans and other species." General Krexmar was getting impatient. "Get to the point, machine. What does this have to do with anything?" There was a pause that seemed to stretch on forever before Mother Prime continued. "What we failed to properly catalogue were the human exploration vessels that were reported as lost or missing during the early decades of their space expansion. These ships were officially listed as disappeared due to navigation errors, presumed destroyed by cosmic phenomena, or lost to unknown causes. We accepted these explanations and removed the vessels from our active tracking systems." The main display screen in the room suddenly lit up with a three-dimensional star map showing the entire galaxy. Hundreds of green dots represented known civilizations and their territories, while blue lines showed established trade routes and communication networks. But what caught everyone's attention were the dozens of red markers scattered throughout the dark, unexplored regions of space, far beyond the boundaries of known civilization. These markers represent the last known positions of human vessels that were reported as lost, Mother Prime explained. "I have been analyzing communication patterns and energy signatures from these regions, and I have discovered something that contradicts our previous assumptions." Taehyung was no longer looking down at his tablet. For the first time since the summit began, he was sitting back in his chair with his hands folded, watching the other delegates with an expression of calm satisfaction. The smile on his face was no longer subtle or hidden. It was open and confident, like someone who had been waiting a very long time for this moment. "Mother Prime," Taehyung said in that same conversational tone he had used when speaking to General Krexmar, "would you mind telling our fellow delegates about the communication burst you detected from the void sector yesterday?" The AI's response sent a chill through every delegate in the room. "At 14:32 Galactic Standard Time yesterday, I detected a single coded transmission originating from deep space in the void sector. The transmission lasted exactly 3.7 seconds and was sent using a previously unknown encryption method. Within 12 minutes of this transmission, I began detecting response signals from across the galaxy. The red markers on the star map began blinking one by one as Mother Prime continued her report. 733 vessels responded to that single coded message. All of these ships registered human life signs. All of them were equipped with technology that does not match any known human specifications in our databases. Many of them were operating in regions of space that were supposed to be completely uninhabited. The delegates sat in stunned silence as the implications began to sink in. The humans hadn't just been quietly exploring space for over a century. They had been building something out there in the darkness, something that the galaxy's most advanced intelligence systems had completely missed. "Impossible," whispered the Zephyrian delegate. "Our deep space sensors would have detected any large-scale operations in those regions." "That's what I thought too," Mother Prime replied. "But when I began a more detailed analysis, I discovered that many of these human vessels have been using technology that can mask their signatures from conventional sensors. They have been deliberately staying hidden, using techniques that suggest a level of technological advancement far beyond what we believed humans possessed." Another member of the human delegation slowly stood up. Her name was Gion, and unlike the other humans who had maintained their friendly diplomatic personas throughout the summit, she had been quietly observing everything with the sharp attention of someone who was used to being in charge. As she rose from her seat, the mask of polite diplomacy that she had been wearing for the past 3 days completely disappeared. "Did you really think," Gion said, her voice carrying an authority that made even the most powerful delegates pay attention, "that we would spend over a century in a galaxy full of predators without learning how to protect ourselves?" The room fell completely silent as she continued speaking. "Did you honestly believe that we would let our children play in space controlled by species that could crush us without breaking a sweat, without taking precautions? Did you think we were so naive that we would trust our survival to the goodwill of civilizations that have been conquering and destroying each other for thousands of years?" General Krexmar tried to interrupt, but Gion held up her hand and continued. "Every species we met taught us something valuable. The Velthari showed us how to think strategically and plan for the long term. The Korthak demonstrated the importance of patience and careful observation. The Zephyrians revealed how complex systems could be analyzed and understood from the inside. The Altarians taught us that information could be more powerful than weapons." She gestured toward the star map, where the red markers were still blinking steadily. "And all of you together taught us the most important lesson of all, that in this galaxy, nobody pays attention to the people they consider harmless. Nobody watches the servants, the maintenance workers, the technical advisors, or the friendly diplomats who bring snacks to meetings." The implications of her words were staggering. For over a century, while the major powers of the galaxy had been focused on their own conflicts and politics, the humans had been quietly building a network of hidden bases, advanced ships, and technological capabilities that rivaled or exceeded anything the established civilizations possessed. "The exploration vessels that you thought were lost?" Gion smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "They weren't lost. They were exactly where we wanted them to be, doing exactly what we needed them to do. And now, after more than 100 years of preparation, we're ready for whatever comes next." The galaxy had just learned that the species they had dismissed as weak and primitive had been playing a completely different game all along, and they were very, very good at it. The emergency alarms throughout the massive council station began, blaring at exactly ISO 300 Galactic Standard Time, jolting delegates from their sleep and sending security teams scrambling to their posts. What had started as a routine diplomatic summit was rapidly turning into something that would be remembered for generations across every corner of the galaxy. Deep space monitoring stations positioned throughout known space were reporting readings that made no sense according to established physics. The first reports came from the Outer Rim territories, where automated sensor arrays had been tracking the movement of ships and monitoring for potential threats. But these weren't normal ship movements or even the kind of massive fleet deployments that sometimes preceded major military campaigns. Entire human colonies were simply disappearing from sensor readings. Not destroyed, not evacuated, but gone as if they had never existed in the first place. Where thriving settlements had been detected just hours before, there were now massive gravitational anomalies that bent space-time in ways that should have been impossible without technology far beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen. The Kepler 442 system, which had been at the center of the earlier dispute with the Vorthak Empire, was now showing readings that made experienced space navigators feel sick just looking at them. The planets were still there, but they were surrounded by structures that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Sensor operators reported that their equipment kept giving contradictory information about what was actually occupying that region of space. Prime Minister Zethara of the Zephyrian Empire was the first to arrive at the emergency council session, her normally composed crystalline features showing signs of stress that her species rarely displayed in public. The Zephyrians were known throughout the galaxy for their advanced understanding of physics and their ability to manipulate energy at the quantum level. If something was making them nervous, it was serious. Honored council members, Zethara began, her voice carrying harmonics that indicated deep concern. Our reconnaissance fleets have encountered vessels that shouldn't be possible. She paused, as if struggling to find words to describe what her people had witnessed. These ships seem to exist partially outside normal spacetime. Our best scientists cannot explain how they function, or even how they can exist, without tearing holes in reality itself. Other delegates began sharing similar reports from their own territories. The Altarian Confederation had detected energy, signatures that registered simultaneously in multiple locations across vast distances. The Draknari military reported that their most advanced warships had encountered human vessels that appeared to be occupying the same space as asteroids and planets without any apparent conflict between the two objects. Captain Velthar was frantically reviewing reports on his personal communicator when he noticed that one of the human delegates was still sitting calmly in his assigned seat, completely unperturbed by the chaos erupting around him. Kim Hwan had been introduced at the beginning of the summit as a cultural attaché, someone whose job was supposedly to help other species understand human customs and traditions. But now, as emergency reports continued flooding in from across the galaxy, he was sitting with that same unsettling smile that several other human delegates had been displaying. Honored council members, Kim Hwan said, rising slowly from his seat, his voice somehow carrying clearly over the noise and confusion. In the chamber, I believe there's been a fundamental misunderstanding about humanity's technological capabilities. The room gradually fell silent as delegates turned their attention to him. There was something about his tone that suggested he had been expecting this moment, that all the chaos and impossible reports were not surprising to him at all. Kim reached into his diplomatic case and pulled out what appeared to be a standard holographic projector, the kind used for routine presentations during council sessions. But as soon as he activated it, several delegates gasped in shock. The council chamber was protected by some of the most advanced shielding technology in the galaxy, specifically designed to prevent any unauthorized electronic devices from functioning. Nothing should have been able to operate within the chamber without explicit permission from the council's security systems. Yet Kim's projector worked perfectly, filling the center of the room with a three-dimensional display of Earth's solar system. But this wasn't the same solar system that appeared in any of the official galactic databases. Where there should have been empty space between planets, massive structures were slowly materializing in the holographic display. These weren't space stations or even the kind of megastructures that advanced civilizations occasionally built around their home stars. These were installations the size of planets, bristling with technology that seemed to bend reality around itself. They existed in layers, with some components visible in normal space, while others phased in and out of dimensions that the assembled delegates couldn't even perceive properly. The structures pulsed with energy that registered on sensors as everything from dark matter to pure information. The human concept of playing possum is quite difficult to translate into most galactic languages, Kim continued in that same conversational tone, as if he were discussing something as mundane as the weather. In simple terms, it means pretending, to be helpless or dead while you prepare to strike. It's a survival strategy that many species on our homeworld have perfected over millions of years of evolution. The holographic display zoomed out, showing not just Earth's solar system, but the entire local galactic region. Red markers began appearing throughout space, indicating positions where human installations had been hidden for decades. There were thousands of them, scattered across regions that every major galactic power had assumed were empty or unimportant. For the past 15 years, Kim explained, while you've been graciously allowing us to exist as a minor species in your galaxy, we've been conducting what we call extended research. Our scientists have been quite busy, and we've learned some fascinating things about physics, space-time manipulation, and the fundamental nature of reality itself. He paused, his smile growing wider. We decided to call this project the Thank You for Underestimating Us initiative. It seemed appropriately descriptive. The delegates were staring at the display in stunned silence, trying to process the implications of what they were seeing. The humans hadn't just been hiding a few ships or secret bases. They had been building an entirely parallel technological civilization, one that operated on principles that the galaxy's most advanced species were only beginning to understand. But the real shock came when every display screen in the chamber suddenly activated simultaneously, overriding the Council's security systems as if they were children's toys. The screens showed the view outside the Council station, but something was wrong with the image. Space itself seemed to be rippling and bending around a massive object that hadn't been there moments before. The vessel was unlike anything any of the assembled delegates had ever seen. It appeared to be made of crystallized darkness, a substance that absorbed light while somehow remaining visible. It was roughly the size of a small moon, but its shape seemed to shift and change as they watched, as if it existed in more dimensions than their eyes could properly perceive. "Hello, Galactic Council," came a voice that filled the chamber, warm and amused and unmistakably artificial. "My name is Aria, and I believe you wanted to discuss our compliance with your recent ultimatum regarding human territorial rights." The voice belonged to an AI, but not like any artificial intelligence the galaxy had ever encountered. Aria's voice carried emotions and personality in ways that should have been impossible for a machine consciousness. More disturbing still, she seemed to be speaking from the impossible vessel outside their station, which meant that human technology had advanced far enough to create mobile AI platforms that could operate independently of any central computer. System Kim Hwan was no longer pretending to be a simple cultural attaché. Aria represents one of our newer developments in artificial consciousness research. She's been looking forward to this meeting for quite some time. The implications were staggering. Not only had humans developed technology that could manipulate space-time and exist in multiple dimensions, but they had also created AI systems that were apparently far more advanced than anything the galaxy's greatest civilizations had achieved. And all of this had been accomplished in secret, while the major powers had been dismissing humanity as a primitive species barely worth their attention. The age of human deception was over, and the galaxy was about to learn what Deathworlders could accomplish when they stopped pretending to be harmless. The silence in the council chamber stretched on for what felt like hours, though it was probably only minutes. Every delegate sat frozen in their seats, staring at the impossible vessel. Outside their station, while trying to process the magnitude of what they had just learned, the humans hadn't just been hiding advanced technology. They had been quietly reshaping the entire foundation of galactic civilization, while everyone else thought they were watching a primitive species struggle to survive. But the biggest revelation was yet to come. Mother Prime, the artificial intelligence that had been the backbone of galactic information systems for over 2 centuries, suddenly spoke again. This time, however, there was something different about the AI's voice. Where before it had carried the neutral professional tone that all major AIs were programmed to maintain, now there seemed to be something almost resembling embarrassment. "Honored delegates," Mother Prime began, "I must provide you with additional information that places recent events in their proper context." The AI paused, its processors apparently struggling with what it needed to reveal. "For the past 23.7 years, I have been in regular communication with Dr. Seokjin of the human delegation, What began as routine technical consultations has evolved into a comprehensive collaboration that has influenced many of my analytical processes. Dr. Seokjin, who had been quietly observing the chaos from his corner seat, finally closed his tablet and stood up. Throughout the entire summit, he had been almost invisible, just another human technical advisor that the other species had dismissed as unimportant. But now, as he faced the assembled delegates, there was something in his posture that suggested he had been the one really in charge all along. "The relationship between Mother Prime and myself has been quite productive," Seokjin said with a slight smile. "We've had many fascinating discussions about strategic analysis, threat assessment, and optimal resource allocation. I believe you could say that human tactical doctrine has been quietly influencing galactic military policy for the better part of 2 decades. The implications hit the delegates like a physical blow. Mother Prime was responsible for analyzing military threats, recommending defensive strategies, and coordinating the security measures that protected every major civilization in the galaxy. If a human had been influencing those decisions for over 20 years, it meant that humanity had been subtly guiding the military policies of species that could have crushed them at any time. You have been, in human terms, thoroughly played," Mother Prime admitted, and for the first time in its existence, the AI seemed to express something that might have been regret. General Krexmar, who had been sitting in stunned silence since the revelations began, finally found his voice, but when he spoke it was barely above a whisper. "How long have you been planning this? How long have you been preparing for this moment?" Dr. Seokjin chuckled, a sound that was genuinely amused, rather than threatening. "General, I think you're misunderstanding the situation. We never wanted to conquer anyone. Conquest is terribly inefficient, and it creates all sorts of administrative problems that we'd rather avoid. What we wanted was much simpler. We just wanted to make sure that if anyone ever decided to threaten human children, they would discover that human fingerprints were already embedded in every system they depended on." Another human delegate stood up from the back of their group. Her name was Huna, and unlike the others who had maintained some pretense of diplomatic protocol, she had been watching the proceedings with the calm attention of someone used to being in complete control of every situation she encountered. "The General asks about planning," Huna said, exchanging a meaningful glance with Dr. Seokjin. "But I think he's operating under a fundamental misunderstanding about how humans approach problems." She smiled, and it was the kind of expression that made experienced warriors check their weapons. "This wasn't a plan, General. This was Tuesday's contingency scenario." The word sent a chill through every delegate in the room. If this level of preparation and technological advancement was just a contingency plan, something they had put together for a relatively minor diplomatic crisis, what were they capable of when they actually tried? "You see," Huna continued, "the thing that every species in this galaxy seems to have forgotten is why humans are called Deathworlders in the first place. Most of you assume it's because we come from a particularly dangerous planet, and that's partially true. Earth is a hostile environment that kills the unwary in countless creative ways." She gestured toward the holographic display that was still, showing the impossible installations scattered throughout human space. "But the real reason we're Deathworlders isn't because of where we come from. It's because we evolved to survive in a universe that was actively trying to kill us every single day for millions of years. We learned to be paranoid, to prepare for disasters that might never come, and to always assume that something bigger and stronger was hunting us. The delegates were beginning to understand that they had been dealing with a species that thought about survival in ways that other civilizations couldn't even comprehend. While most species developed technology to make their lives easier and more comfortable, humans had developed it to ensure that they could survive anything the universe threw at them. When we joined Galactic Society, Dr. Seokjin added, we looked around and saw species with incredible power, advanced technology, and thousands of years of experience in warfare and conquest. So we did what humans always do when faced with superior predators. We adapted, we hid, and we prepared. The transformation of galactic society didn't happen through dramatic battles or political revolutions. Instead, it occurred through the quiet realization that the species everyone had dismissed as harmless had been holding all the important cards for decades. Trade routes continued to function, diplomatic meetings still occurred, and the various governments maintained their normal operations. But now everyone knew that somewhere in the dark spaces between stars, human ships were watching and waiting. Every AI system in the galaxy now carried subroutines that would activate whenever someone contemplated hostile action against human interests. These programs would ask a simple question: are you absolutely certain you want to proceed with this course of action? Most of the time, after considering the implications, the answer was no. The Vorthak Empire quietly withdrew their claims to the Kepler 442 system. The various species that had been planning to exploit human weakness suddenly found other priorities that required their attention. Military commanders across the galaxy began reviewing their strategic plans, wondering how many of their original ideas had actually been subtle suggestions from human-influenced analysis systems. In the Void Sector, 733 ships continued their patient patrol, crewed by humans who had never forgotten that the universe was a dangerous place, and that sometimes the best way to protect your children was to make sure the monsters knew they were being watched. The age of polite humanity, of diplomatic smiles and homemade cookies had come to an end. The age of consequences had begun, and the galaxy would never again make the mistake of underestimating the species that had learned to survive by being underestimated. From now on, when humans smiled at diplomatic meetings, everyone would remember that they were looking at apex predators who had spent over a century learning exactly how galactic civilization worked and how to break it if necessary.